Hi, I'm Margherita Capacci, one of the producers of Asymmetrical Haircuts. I also run the monthly newsletter and the Patreon page, where we publish weekly reading recommendations and the bonus episodes of the War Criminals Book Club, where once per month, Janet, Steph, and often a guest, read and discuss a book or a movie connected to international justice. And that is what I'm bringing you for this last episode of our August specials. Today, we want to give everyone access to one of our recent book club episodes. Except this time we review documentary, and we do so with friend of the pod Anna Srovin Coralli. It's quite a special discussion. We talk about enforced disappearances of Central American migrants in Mexico and the root causes of why so many people are fleeing their countries. And Anna has been in touch with some of the relatives of the missings. So we hear about what these kind of documentaries can mean to them. If you like what you hear and want more, please consider supporting us on Patreon. You can find us at patreon.com/asymmetricalhaircuts. All the money goes to the long-term producers and to making sure that the podcast runs smoothly. Hope you'll enjoy it.
No one can act with impunity.
These are crimes that are beyond the pale.
We are talking about human beings. We're not talking about numbers.
We need a court. That's as simple as that.
This is Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast with Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg.
All rise.
Hi, I'm Janet.
Hi, I'm Steph.
Hi, I'm Margherita, the producer of this podcast.
And welcome to the War Criminals Book Club, especially for our sponsors on Patreon who love the Asymmetrical Haircuts podcast. This is where we usually discuss a great or a terrible book, and sometimes we get around to doing a film or a podcast that they have to be connected to international justice in some way.
Yeah, I think I need to break in with a little apology. We didn't come to you last week, but that was because I was essentially stuck at the NATO summit covering that for Reuters.
Did you sleep there? Steph? Were you that stuck?
Kind of. I mean, I was hoping to cycle back and forth to home, but so many even cycle roads were closed off. The security was so insane around it that in the end, I begged a friend to sleep on her couch so that I didn't have to make the trek back and forth. So, but I kind of ate, drank and slept NATO for a few days. But it was kind of nice to come home late yesterday, and I needed to watch the documentary we're going to talk about. And I completely just watched it without any I didn't read anything about the documentary I was watching. I didn't know what it was going to be about. I just
absorbed it. Just
it.
Let it in.
So let's talk a bit about what we're going to do today.
Well, really, in the spirit of the disruption of the NATO summit, today again, we're disrupting the standard way of our podcast. We're going to do not a book, we're going to do a documentary. I think this is the only second time we've done a moving picture. I think last time was maybe a documentary, maybe not. But this time we've got Toshkua, I don't know, and is directed by Ludovic Bondieu. And we're going to discuss it with friend of the podcast. Hello, Anna Srovin Coralli. Hi.
Hello, thanks for having me here today to discuss the documentary.
Now, you may recognize Anna because she joined our regular podcast in 2023 to discuss the first case that looks at enforced disappearance in Switzerland, where a Belarusian man was acquitted for crimes dating back to 1999. And today's documentary also deals with disappearances of all kinds. So, Anna, do you want to introduce yourself a little more and tell us a bit about your work on the topic and how you relate to this documentary?
Yeah, absolutely. So I basically started to work on enforced disappearances. I think it's been now around 8 years ago. I was introduced to this topic even in my own home country, which is Slovenia. Where sometimes the discussion would arise specifically with regards to the Yugoslav war, where also enforced disappearances took place. There were generally a lot of missing persons in the former Yugoslav war. And then I spent lots of time in Mexico, which is, a country where you would all of a sudden hear people saying, oh, she just disappeared, or he just disappeared, they just disappeared. Desaparecieron, would they say, son desaparecidos, and you would say, but how come? People they don't tend to disappear, they don't tend to vanish. And they would say, yes, here is just common. Sometimes people just disappear. You just lose trace of them, and you don't really know what is the reason. Is it because they were involved with a criminal gang, or it's because they were trying to cross the border? In any case, the phenomenon is somehow so common that it really surprised me, and it somehow stayed with me since then. And then I took the course on enforced disappearance by a very, I would say, amazing professor who really impacted me both personally and professionally in the past years. Professor Gabriela Citroni, she's the current chair of the Working Group on Enforced Disappearances. And it's somehow through this course that then I slowly started to work on the topic, and a bunch of other circumstances in life allowed me to really dig into this topic, mostly from actually human rights and humanitarian perspective. Basically working with families from El Salvador, from Colombia, then also in the context of Africa, generally on missing persons and missing migrants. And it was at the time that I actually started to notice that one of the things where more research was required, and it's something that the families would in fact stress, was really this question of criminal liability for enforced disappearances, which is what was then eventually the topic of my PhD, which I very recently submitted and I'm going to defend in September.
So it sounds like this documentary is sort of completely up your street, because it's about families and disappearance and maybe to some degree looking for a bit of accountability, but really their search. So how did you come across it?
One of the good things of publishing on certain topics that I would say represent more of a niche topic is that very often you get contacted and you somehow allow for the families who get stuck in their own system to search for the knowledge, because the families are impressively active all the time, and to somehow search for you and get in touch with you as either researcher or practitioner on specific topics, or sometimes just on gaining visibility. And this was in fact the case for the documentary that we're discussing today, that the Mexican collective called Impacta Cine, which basically collaborated in producing this movie together with the mother and the other actors in the movie and with the director, contacted me some months ago, and they said, we are going to travel to the mother of Marco Antonio, who is the young guy who disappeared in the documentary. We are going to travel with the mother to Europe, to some countries, to Italy, to France. And we were just searching for paths, basically to, get in touch with people who are working on the topic. So it was at that moment where I always feel that the least that we can do is to try to really bring awareness to people to this topic and try to connect the families with as many people as we can, either in Geneva or in the Netherlands or wherever they are. So in fact, for the mother, I think this podcast that we are recording today, of course, she knows about it because I told her. It really matters, really changes her day, and really means for her a fight for justice and contributes to the search of her son.
Wow, that's a bit humbling. Maybe we need to tell a bit more about the documentary before we go in and discuss it further. It was published, I think, originally in 2023 and has already won several awards, including a Best Documentary Award by the Association of Film Journalists in Mexico. And the director, this guy, Ludovic Bonlieu, has already directed, because I was looking him up as well and found he'd done lots of different documentaries about violence and politics in Mexico, and looks like his work's quite well regarded. There's a synopsis that Margarita, our producer, has dug out for us. It really struck me reading this, how much documentaries are often about as a central character. And this really follows this woman, Mary, who travels from Honduras to the US border, and she's looking for her son, as you mentioned, Anna. He was a migrant and he was disappeared, maybe kidnapped in Mexico. And during her journey, she meets other mothers who are also looking for their children. And via their stories, we hear about the magnitude of this disappearance crisis. And then there's another character, Francisco, who he's one of the leaders of the Pesh ethnic group, and he is looking at the disappearance of his own rainforest, the tropical rainforest, and the disappearance of his language and how his children are disappearing from his life, migrating. And Toshkua means to disappear in the Pesh language of this ethnic group in Honduras. And this film tells that story.
Well, Anna, you already said that you met Mari Martinez, who's the mother that this documentary follows, and she says that it's really important for her to publicize what she's doing. And I found it particularly moving in this documentary. Like I said, I really went into it cold. I didn't know what I was watching. And because the word Toshk was also Pesh language, I didn't know what language I was going to look at. I wasn't even sure what country this was going to be in. But it really struck me because it shows Mary's travel through all these different Latin American countries. And she's always asking people and showing the picture of her son and asking people if they've seen it. And it's such a completely basic maternal instinct to look for your child when he's lost. It even hit me so viscerally that I was looking at this for the first 10 minutes and it was, wow, my 15-year-old went out jogging. And because there are some bridges closed in our neighborhood, he took longer than normal to come home. And I had to stop the documentary and kind of keep myself from physically going out to look for him because it was connecting so much to that kind of maternal instinct of like, oh my God, I don't know. I see this mother talking about her missing child and I don't know where my child is and I need to go out right now and look for him. So it really hit home in that part. I think that's also part because I was exhausted from working, but it is such a basic thing to look at it. And I think that bit of the documentary was very, very nicely filmed. That was also the bit that resonated the most with me. I found Francisco, I found it beautifully filmed. It was very beautiful footage of the jungle of Honduras, which I could look at for hours. But I felt it was a bit forced to put these things together. But that would be my small criticism of it. But I wonder, you are also very focused on, of course, people disappearing and looking for accountability. How did you feel that was woven in with the kind of natural disappearance that they tried to weave in with Francisco?
To me, it is in a way a natural connection that happens and we often perhaps don't notice because with the forest, this is also a loss of ecosystem, it's a loss of animals. At the end of the day, it's disappearance of people, no? At the end, movie very clearly mentions that Francisco actually had to, at the end, leave the forest because simply couldn't survive anymore there. It's the end of the day, it means also the end of the language. So somehow I would say it's all connected. I think the movie for me essentially tries to highlight the roots of disappearance as such, which really has to do with much more just people going on the border searching for job opportunities. And I think that's something that even in the world, if you like, of enforced disappearances, it's often not sufficiently stressed, it's not sufficiently understood. Or in the meetings, if you like, of states where they would discuss the issue of migration, I think they have this narrow visage of only, okay, we need to control the borders. Okay, the issue is that people are moving, are taking illegal paths, but in reality it has to do with really, I would say, the root of generally conflicts, of the reason why people cannot survive in their environment anymore. And I appreciated that the director somehow managed, or he strived at least, to highlight these both faces, if you like, of disappearances. Because maybe Francisco had to go to the US as well, and maybe Francisco didn't have a passport and he had to take one of the buses through the state called Tamaulipas, which was the one of the Mexican states which is known for disappearances in it's a state where Marco Antonio, so the son of Mari, also disappeared. So this is how I managed to somehow connect the two things in my head.
It's interesting to hear your perspective, Anna, because I also felt, so the cinematography is amazing. It really gets you inside like the jungle of Honduras, and it really gets you like to feel kind of the humidity of the place. And you look at this way of life, like very quiet, but very like collaborative. So I thought that was really beautiful. And I found it really interesting how it shows you like every little moment of her search for her son. So even like the small ones, and it's really impressive, their strength.
Mothers are impressive. Women, we are impressive. I think the instinct that we have, because you've seen also as well that in the documentary, there's always the mothers, there's always women, no, searching group of women, and they would go and they would travel hundreds and hundreds kilometers to find their relatives. I think there is no probably stronger love than the love for your own child.
Yeah, they were even searching themselves through the dirt for bones and pieces of bodies to then get hopefully recognized. And yeah, they were doing with such a like stoic attitude. So that I found really impressive. But to me as well, because I didn't have this perspective maybe on the need to kind of analyze the root causes of this migration. So I also felt it was trying to fit a little bit too much, at least for me, with also the loss of land. And I would have liked to kind of go deeper into both issues maybe. And also on the loss of land, it was super interesting and kind of I would have liked to know more. And also maybe get some hope of any sort, if there is any, in this field, because I feel it's like the whole movie is a search, and you come out of it kind of like, wow, this is a lot. And you really, of course, their strength brings hope, but that's really about it. But yeah, maybe this is exactly the point, and maybe there is really just no hopeful take from that situation.
It kind of struck me that that's one of the things I often think about with documentaries. I mean, how do you decide what the frame is? And it was clear that, for me, this cinematographer has worked on this issue, the disappeared in Mexico, a lot. I mean, he really knows his stuff. And what I imagine, it's just my imagination, is that he's kind of knocked his head against the idea that, yeah, you can tell that story again and again, and you can find the best characters to tell it, and you can show them as mothers, and you can get people deeply caring about it, but it kind of remains at that level. And I think he ended up wanting to say more, and that's what he was looking for, was how to actually tell that deeper, broader story. For me, I thought it was a bit forced, trying to do it a bit too didactic. Steph?
One of the things while I was watching this was the kind of journalist storyteller way you structure a story in me, was looking at this while it was going on and was thinking, am I going to find out in the last 5 minutes that Mary's son, or that Francisco and Mary are somehow linked up and his son left because of the logging and those things? I was kind of waiting for, it was set up in a way that I was waiting for the filmmaker to connect it more broadly, and thought, if you would think this up in a book and have a really nice narrative way to do this, you would link them up right at the end and have that kind of be the reveal. And of course that didn't happen, and I realized also that was reality never really fits so neatly together, and when it does, we always have this kind of, well, you couldn't make it up. If you put it in a Hollywood movie, we'd think it was too forced. So,
well, Steph, we regularly end up with some of the books that we look at and say, come on. I mean, why did you twist the reality just to fit your narrative? Because it doesn't work like that.
No. And I think I understand what he's doing, and I understand also Anna's comments that this is also showing the root causes of migration. But I think there was background, but it was kind of odd with these very American newsreels. There could have been more of an in-depth background that would maybe link these two things together. But maybe that's also me being more of a journalist than a filmmaker, thinking I need some more, at least in-depth explanation, and would link it together in that. But that doesn't mean that it isn't a very beautiful contemplative movie. We're still thinking about it. It's triggered all these feelings and thoughts in us. So I think that's really all a good documentary needs to do.
I think if I may add something on the Mexican context as well, because I thought at this moment this might be actually helpful for you, but for listeners in general, because that's something that the movie actually doesn't dig into. Perhaps it takes for granted. Perhaps it hopes that one does their own research. But in this sense, perhaps I've made the connection in my head. So Mexico established quite some years ago a special mechanism, which they called like external mechanism for search investigation with some countries, including Honduras, from basically those are, countries, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala, where it's very common that the people actually travel. They take their, marked paths already well used by these migrants, that they tend to travel, usually due to lack of economic opportunities, to the US. So they try to get either to the US or, less and less, this now being the case, just to one of the Mexican states. Oftentimes, these people never manage to get to their destination countries, either because they're disappeared or because they are massacred. And this I say because, in fact, Tamaulipas, which again being the state which is also part of the documentary that we're discussing, is known for two huge massacres which took place now already 14, 13 years ago in 2011, 2012, and which triggered a number of mechanisms in Mexico. These mechanisms are either for the search, for criminal investigation, to assist the families, and so on. They really are numerous. And one thing that, again, I made the connection without maybe the director actually thinking about this, was for me the issue, and related to the word disappearance, of really somebody disappearing also in legal terms, in all terms, because these mechanisms are so complex to understand that when a family tries to approach the authorities in their embassies, for instance, in this case in Honduras, or when they try to approach different authorities in Mexico, sometimes it feels as if their loved one didn't exist, literally. This not being directly highlighted in the movie, but it's something that does often happen.
What surprise me in the documentary, and I know a little bit about Mexico and the background there, is that Marie does speak to kind of authorities and what seems to be police figures who can show her the documentation of who was detained where. And we always note the kind of quotes that we memorable quotes or things that we see in the movie. And one of the things that I had noted down is that at some point this investigator tells her Mexico has 45,000 unidentified bodies. And I thought that is an amazing number for a country that doesn't have a recognized civil war or conflict. That is a brain-melting number of potentially things you need to identify. And those are only the bodies they found, because as Margarita said, you see in the documentary that they're also sifting through earth to find little bone fragments. And you can imagine how much more of those there are that they haven't found. So he pulls on a lot of threads that aren't like there's 3 or 4 documentaries in this documentary in a way.
Absolutely, and it's something that doesn't come up in a movie, but again, it's in fact a recent development which occurred just a bit more than a month ago, and it's pretty common in cases of migrants, is that, of course, Mari in this documentary, she goes to the police, and in fact, I agree with you that police is portrayed in a pretty nice manner in this documentary, or not even like not only the police, but different authorities that she approaches. But just a month ago, the so-called, they call it in Mexico, Fiscalía General de la República, which is basically Attorney General office at the federal level, because the way that the criminal system works in Mexico is that the federal level is basically, they focus on specific type of crimes, one of them being also crimes by or against migrants and organized crime. And then you have state authorities, basically of each Mexican state, that they investigate sometimes something in parallel, sometimes independently. To tell you very frankly, it's just a mess. And I always admire victims, how they can understand the system. For me, the research that I've done in Mexico has been triple as much complicated as my PhD, for you to have the understanding. It was the most difficult research that I've done, because everything was contradicting itself. I always said, if a victim, by victim, I of course mean also the families, they want to understand this, I don't know how they don't get crazy, which is for me additional torture as well for the families, if it's not very easy to understand to whom you approach, to whom you don't. But all this to say that a month ago, basically the competent authority for investigating and searching for Marco Antonio basically decided to close the case, pronouncing themselves that they are incompetent for the case, because they came to the conclusion that the potential perpetrators of the case were private individuals, not organized crime, although it was stated also in the documentary that Mari was giving information that basically her son was seen when he was basically leaving. I mean, in Spanish, you have virtually an expression which says, les bajaron de autobús, which, there are many of these buses where then they are stopped by organized crime groups, and then migrants are either asked to go down, or the members of the cartels, they go on the bus and they just somehow pick some of the members. And this is it. And basically for Mari, she has nothing else she can do. Now the case will be in the hands of the state authorities of Tamaulipas, which would mean that Mari, each time when she wants to have information on what is going with the file on her son, she would have to physically travel to Tamaulipas. We are speaking of hundreds and hundreds of kilometers to a different country. So in a way, this is, again, somehow the case has disappeared. It is out there, but you cannot really do anything about it. So for me, this is why this label of disappearance is somehow popping up in different ways in the documentary.
Apart from disappearance, another theme I thought came through it was this theme of either self or land destruction. I mean, there's disappearance and there's destruction. And there's the idea that the land is being destroyed. The idea is that bodies are being destroyed. The idea of these bones. And, she describes herself as she was left with a broken soul. I mean, just how ravaged all of these lands are by this experience that is going on, not only in Mexico, not only in Honduras, but in so many different parts of Central America. I thought that came across extremely well in the documentary of how destroyed everything feels.
Absolutely. And it pushes often the indigenous people to move really from their lands. I mean, it somehow in a way destroys them as communities. Really, I think, contributes to the loss also of their language, to the ecosystems, to everything. I think the language Pesh, I also don't know if I pronounce it correctly, it's spoken, at least it's information that I could find, only by around 300 persons. It's incredible. It's nothing. I mean, it's going to disappear, I guess, at some point. It's incredible. It's really, really incredible. And I think that this would be, of course, a great topic for another project, but we are often also not aware of our own role, of the role of our own countries in the disappearance of these lands, which they seem distant, but usually they don't disappear just out of nowhere. It's because we are searching, because we have economic interest, because many corporations, many governments, as we all know, and this, luckily, at least we have now some cases in this regards also happening on different bases in Europe. But innocent people are pushed out of their own land for other economically oriented reasons. So this comes also very strongly in the movie.
Margarita, do you have a favorite moment or a favorite quote in the documentary?
Maybe to kind of also bring something new to this is also, indeed, I found it that it would have deserved a whole new documentary in itself, but I also found it very beautiful when Francisco walks up that mountain. And if I'm not wrong, he was trying to see what was going wrong with his land, but you can also just see as kind of like a spiritual way up and like kind of reconnecting with their beliefs in the land and the animals that live in it. And you just see this walk up and it's so beautiful. And instead of like explaining this system of beliefs or whatever, I found it very, very nice that the director just like takes you with this man up this mountain, and you see that it's not gonna change anything really, but it's very like important to him.
Janet, do you have a favorite?
Apart from kind of noting the sadness sort of pervading the movie, I particularly enjoyed things like when you have the group of mothers together and describe themselves as the caravan of the mothers of the disappeared migrants. So clarity, their sense of self-identity. And then you had each one, Nicaragua present, Honduras present.
Present. I thought it was beautiful.
So
I really love that bit.
I love the shape of the women. They're real women.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way in which you don't always get portrayed on the screen all the time. You get women who are very strange looking, plastified to some degree. And these, that's what a woman looks like. She looks small and round and has breasts and a bum, and it's all together, and they're strong and they walk and so on. And that I really appreciated, that they were the central characters, these real women.
I think that I'm asking this, of course, because I want to set up what my favorite bit was. And I was still very much in the kind of mom sense, and I thought it was extremely haunting when Maddie's on a bus and she's looking outside and the director makes the vistas, and it's kind of dull, South American countryside. It's the side of a highway. There's not much to see. But she says, when we go in the caravans, I like to sit by the window of the bus because I like to look out on the road where we're passing, and because I feel I see my son, and then I'll have to ask the driver to stop, and then I would meet my son again. She has that hope. She must know how, in a way, unrealistic that is, but she keeps that alive. And I can totally imagine that thought of, you would want that to happen, and you would make up in your mind that you're sitting there and then he would be on the side of the road, and then you could ask the driver to stop. And I don't think that you can ever really stop thinking that. Somehow, I think the human brain really doesn't allow you to kind of do that when this is your child that is missing, when you have no proof of what has happened. There is always this tantalizing possibility that you were wrong, or that the worst thing hasn't happened. And I felt it kept her very much in her dignity, that even as she's kind of spinning this fantasy, she's very open and clear about it. And there is not some kind of voiceover that says, there are so many disappeared people, nobody ever returns, or those kinds of things. It's just, you have to absorb her hope and her fantasy a bit with her. And I thought that was very well done.
You've said the word which was for me crucial, which is hope, because I think really, in fact, I think movie tries to send the message that even if you lose everything, never lose hope. And in fact, Doña Mari, she stresses, she says, what drives us onward is really the belief that we will know, and we will continue to search until we will know, and we will find all possible options, even if it's from a girl from Slovenia who lives in Switzerland, or it's from whatever, a podcast that we're recording today, that the others will know. And it matters to us because eventually, maybe not for our sons or daughters, but maybe in so many years, things will change. And in fact, they have changed. The families have really been this drive of everything that has happened. Again, if you like, in this enforced disappearances world, it's thanks to them, because they were going already. I mean, the grandmothers of the disappeared and mothers of the disappeared in Argentina, but nowadays the migrants, as you saw, because they physically go, they walk and they stand on a street and they put the photos and they stop people and say, did you see them? Did you see them? Because it means to me if you perhaps saw them. And it's really a way how they've achieved everything that they've achieved. Somehow they have this constant drive to hope, to continue. And I think we can learn so much from them in this sense, really, despite being often in a system where one could get frustrated, right? Because sometimes we forget, and this is very quickly mentioned in the documentary, but it's also the reasons why actually these people are disappeared. Because here we again, I think, come to the roots of migration. Very often nowadays, the reasons are, if the perpetrators are organized crime groups, is the fact because they want them to join the crime group. Sometimes it's also because it's the way for them to get the money, so they require ransom. But on the last podcast that we've discussed together, I've mentioned the movie Ciencias Particulares, I think it's called, which shows a story of a guy who actually wanted to cross the border. And he was given a choice by the organized crime. They told him, either you join ours or we kill you. And then he was confronted in a situation where he was asked to kill his mother. He didn't choose to kill her, But what I'm trying to say is that if we really dig very deep into the situation, many members of these cartels are also victims or are also people who came from very difficult situations themselves. And it's somehow a vicious circle in which these families are also trapped, but they still continue to push and believe and to help each other. No? They find this community of how they help, and they basically search for their loved ones together. Now, the last thing that I wanted to stress is perhaps, one thing that has been happening now in the past months, due to, as you know, the more harsh measures taken with regards to migrants on the borders with the US, is that in fact, in terms of the numbers, the migration, so the number of migrants that are crossing the borders has drastically decreased, really drastically. I mean, these numbers are somehow misleading, but they still show, at least I would say, a little bit the tendency. But as a result, many more people are now left in their own countries. Also, I mean, for instance, women much more exposed to sexual abuse, to prostitution. It comes with other risks because it's not like this economic situation in the country has improved, so there's more jobs, but they are simply more exposed to other type of violence. But Doña Mari would for sure say, despite that, there is hope. I'm sure she would say this if she was here.
I wanted to mention also another really hopeful moment, and also what you said in terms of community. I think it was also really beautiful when one of the mother knows that she's gonna like reconnect with her daughter, and there is this like circle of just hugs and cries and support from everyone else, and everyone else, you could see in their eyes that they had in mind their own sons and daughters, but they were still 100% there to kind of celebrate with her. So I thought it was also a moment in the documentary where this sense of community really comes through.
Well, I have a sense there that both Margarita and Anna would recommend the documentary. What about you, Steph? Sort of flat out after enormous amount of work, would you recommend it?
I think I would, because even flat out after an enormous amount of work, it managed to captivate me and play on my not play on my emotions, but elicit these emotions. And even though I think I can see ways in which I think it could have been improved, I definitely think it's worth a watch. It also really kind of inspires me to read more, maybe do more podcasts on disappearances in Mexico and Central America and all these things. And they have this very tantalizing little bit of that the paramilitaries from Guatemala are also involved in these groups. And I'm really like taking notes that I should have, how these various armed groups in the region also get caught up in these criminal networks, which is of course something we know, but they touch on that briefly, and so it also kind of inspired me to know more about that. So yes, I would recommend it.
Yeah, I'd say make sure you're in the mood to sit back and absorb it rather than having to look at it quickly. It's not something to just dash into. It's something to let unfold. And yeah, ton of stories out of it, ton of ways of thinking. I've been thinking about Mexico and Disappeared, I think, for a good 10 years and come across different people at different times in The Hague who've been working on it. And each time, felt overwhelmed. Each time felt, this is a huge story. And my God, Mexico's a big place. My God, these states are really important, individual states, as well as the state of Mexico. And each place seems to be different. And each time thought, okay, I'll think about it again another time. So thanks, Anna, for forcing us to press our noses against this particular piece of glass again and really think about it, because it's a subject that, we all think is important.
Thank you so much. Just to add for our listeners as well, that perhaps we can put somewhere in the notes the link to the Impacta Cine as well, Instagram, because if you send them a message, they will give you a password and you can watch basically the documentary. So I think this would be great. And as the very last thing, I really want to stress how little we can do to really make life one of the families better. Some months ago, I had an event with also a relative from a different state in Mexico. And I asked him at the end, I said, can we do something for you here in Geneva? And he said, if you share through Facebook, Instagram, whatever, LinkedIn, a photo of a family member of someone has disappeared, this changes a world for a mother or father, because they say, wow, from somebody from Lithuania, my brother matters. Like they've actually shared their photo. So that's somehow a very, I would say, easy way how we can contribute as well to this fight against disappearances and really improves the lives of the families.
Well, it's very directed at me, living in Lithuania, Anna. But I'm sure all of our listeners all over the world should think about doing that. Thank you again so much for joining us. We should explain to people what we're going to do next. So next time, we also have another guest on the podcast. That's Lucy Gaynor, another friend of the pod. And she has suggested that we read together Michel Rolfe-Trouot, The Past, which I haven't even started at all yet, and I don't know anything about it. So thanks, Lucy. We'll enjoy doing that.
Yes, I think it's going to be some reflection on how historians deal with legal processes. So let's see, as somebody who studied history now almost also historically long ago, I'm always interested in ways to see history. And I wanted to say that I think we should also share the pictures from the people in the documentary Searching for Missing People on our Instagram, which we will do at least give somebody a boost. So thank you very much for getting this documentary onto your attention and coming out to talk to us, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast, created and presented by Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg, in partnership with the Hague Humanity Hub. Music is by autonautics.com. You can find show notes and everything about the podcast on asymmetricalhaircuts.com. This show is available on every major podcast service, so please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word.